Welcome boys and girls, Costin here with a discussion about campaign rankings in Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires. For over a week, there has been an ongoing discussion on Reddit about hard, easy, and average difficulty campaigns, as well as campaigns that are really fun, okay, or just plain bad. So people have voted. There's still ongoing voting for the final campaign on the list, which is a hard but also really bad campaign, but it's very clear who's going to win, unless something very surprising does happen. It does become very clear very quickly with these kind of Reddit votes who's going to win, partly because of the way the upvote system does work. So anyway, there are certainly some things I do agree with on this list, things that I do disagree, but I did want to highlight this for a couple of reasons. It does show you how people in certain communities think about various campaigns, but also to talk about the legendary lords themselves. Where I do agree with Reddit's choice, I will present an alternative to that. Where I do disagree, there are just cases where I do flat out disagree with the perspective that Reddit had on certain things. So, to start with, we're going to go from hard campaigns to average difficulty campaigns or factions to easy factions to play in the game. Now, my perspective on a difficult campaign is perhaps different than what a lot of people consider. Like, for a lot of people, I can imagine that a hard campaign is something that is a hard start. For me, it's not necessarily about a hard start, though a hard start can contribute a lot to that, but it's the overall picture. And yes, there are campaigns where regardless of how well you play, it can still be difficult. But regardless of that, for a hard faction, but also a fun campaign, people voted for Emmerich. Now, how do I feel about this choice? Well, I can understand that people do enjoy Emmerich. I enjoy Emmerich. I don't think it's the best campaign in the world, so I wouldn't necessarily consider it the most fun campaign, and I certainly don't consider it the hardest campaign in the game. So the idea that it's a hard but fun campaign, I don't think it really works out like that. Interestingly enough, Drazov, who starts next to Emmerich, I think actually has a harder campaign because of the dynamics with Grungor and all that, and the fact you have dwarves and greenskins who both hate you. Hell, everyone hates you, or virtually everyone hates you. Emmerich may not necessarily have a lot of he may not have a lot of allies to work with, but he does have some of them, and he can also hard counter certain factions like Nurgle. He can deal with Kugath pretty easily. He can deal with Gorse fairly easily. Sure, it is a risky start of a campaign where you can be overwhelmed by Drazov and Trash, but it can also work very well in your favor. So I would consider that a hard start potentially, though not guaranteed even then, because there's things you can do and manipulate things from that perspective. The campaign, I would say, that is a hard faction to play in a campaign, and mind you, I'm only considering legendary difficulty on this, whereas people voting on Reddit probably don't. Not necessarily anyway, but from my perspective, a hard faction to play, but also a really fun one, or rather a hard campaign, would be Malachi Makason. To begin with, you have Arbol, you have Archeon, you have Efrat, you have Trog, you have Azazel. Those are just immediate threats. You probably won't be able to deal with every single one of those issues perfectly. And the more you play this campaign, the more threats you start encountering, especially because of the mechanics of the dwarves, which incentivize you to deal with various corners of the map. Also, keep in mind, Malachi's objective is to kill Drazov. His objective is to start over there in Krakadrak and make his way basically to Drazov and Emmerich. Find people along the way. That is a hell of a road to begin with. Also, it's wiping out Grimgor, it's wiping out Tsar Nagrun. So that in itself, given the number of enemies you're fighting with and the quality of those enemies, that can be pretty brutal. You're in a very exposed position. You will be attacked by multiple enemies at the same time. And yes, you do have incredibly powerful armies, and you can get not just one really powerful army, but multiple powerful armies. But at the same time, you're probably going to be stretched thin trying to deal with all of them. Things can go brilliantly from your perspective, but it can also go sideways very, very quickly. And yes, you do get some really powerful units for free. You get all kinds of upgrades. You get Thunder Barges for free eventually. Though by the point you get Thunder Barges, you should have stabilized your campaign situation. It does take a while anyway. Like, I don't know, a couple dozen turns at least to get those kind of Thunder Barges in a Malachi campaign. just inherent limitations on the speed that you can go for it. So you have power. It is available, but you're forced to use that power. Mind you, Emmerich himself has a good amount of power as well. Like, he has more nobles. He can get more nobles than anyone else, so he can get more casualty replenishment than any other high elf. Well, except our Alariel, to be sure. But compared to the other high elf legendary lords. And while his starting position can be exposed, you're also in a situation where you can pick and choose your enemies to some degree. Like, sure, Drazov and Trich might just march against you, but they might just as well just march against each other. That is not an advantage that Malachi has in his campaign. Now, the next on this list would be a hard campaign, but also one that's just kind of okay. Not particularly terrible, but not particularly great. People on Reddit voted for Malekith. I can understand Malekith being kind of like a whatever campaign that a lot of people don't care about. Like, his faction mechanics aren't especially great. His starting position isn't the most fun in the world. The things he has to deal with, all well and good. That perspective I do understand. However, calling Malekith's campaign hard is frankly ridiculous. Here's the reasons why. Consider your natural enemies, your natural expansion path, the one that's very clear and obvious to you. You go start marching to the west, you deal with this cave, and guess what you can do, and you should do? You can sell the Altar of Ultimate Darkness to Grombrindle and make him an ally very quickly in a campaign, and then you can destroy everyone in your path, or you can let Grombrindle deal with those issues. Oh, Valkia has a problem? Let Grombrindle deal with it. And the thing is, you only have Grombrindle as Valkia as potential threats, not even guaranteed threats in a campaign. And beyond that, you don't really have much. You can argue Alifanar, but his AI is so pushed to the brink by so many different factions that it is highly unlikely Alifanar will ever march against you in a force that could defeat you. He probably will declare war on you, but you look at Katep, you look at Valkia, you look at Grombrindle. Now, you can't really ally all of these factions. You're going to have to pick and choose, but you're not forced to fight any of these factions unless you choose to, so you have that kind of level of control. So from my perspective, while I agree that Malekith is a pretty meh campaign, I don't agree at all that he is a hard campaign. From my view, a hard faction that is kind of okay, kind of meh in some ways, is Alifanar. Okay, so I do like Alifanar as a character. I do like his stock stance underway, but I think High Elves in general are just kind of whatever right now. There's just some really bad racial design with the High Elves that does limit the enjoyment in every single one of their campaigns. So I do not like playing High Elves. There's a lot of things that are broken. There's a lot of things you can abuse, like Administrator, Archmages, and all that kind of stuff. You do have a lot of power. The campaign mechanics that Alifanar has, like those contracts, those murdering contracts he has, those do work, and they do give you a good level of power. But they can also just flat out not work in certain situations. So I'm kind of iffy on that whole affair with respect to him. So I do like his campaign. I've played it quite a few times. I do think it's the kind of campaign, like, this is the thing about Alifanar's campaign. You can't really control how things are going to shape up. You can't control, like, your early game might be very easy. Mind you, Malekith's campaign can be a cakewalk, and I'm quite serious. Like, it might take you some time to figure out, but it is a cakewalk of an early game. Alifanar's early game can be pretty easy, but then you get Be'lakor, Helebron, Malekith, Silostra, Tarax, potentially Katep, potentially Sisters of Twilight, and then you also have all that's going on in Ulthuan to deal with. So that is my perspective on why I consider a hard faction that's just kind of, average. Just kind of meh across the board. Or rather, the race is like that, not necessarily the faction, but the race does have a major impact on, with respect to the faction itself. Then for a hard campaign or a hard faction to play, but one that has a bad campaign, well, this is still up for grabs. But right now, the Demon Prince is winning the votes by quite a bit. So, how do I feel about it? If you're asking me if I think Daniel is bad, yes, absolutely. 100% qualified, yes. 110%. Over 9,000%. he is horrible. He's easily one of the worst legendary lords and factions and campaigns that Creative Assembly has ever designed. And I'm not saying that in the sense of Warhammer. I'm saying that in the sense of Total War as a whole. It's that really bad. It was bad in Realms of Chaos. It's absolutely atrocious in Immortal Empire. So really horrible campaign. Would I say it's a hard campaign? Not quite. So, you know all those issues Malachi has to deal with, all the chaos factions around him? You're pretty good. You have pretty good relations with them. Sure, you might have to fight some of them for territory, but you get to pick and choose who you're going to fight. The only potential threats in this campaign, well, Malachi's AI, not when you're playing him, but his AI is fairly passive. So he's not really a threat, besides he has other issues to deal with, like Arbol. So that's not really an issue. So you're left with kind of like Malice Darkblade and Kislev. Beyond the fact that Boris Ursus, Katrin, Kastaltin can just end up flat out dying, even if you don't get involved in that, you're in a safe enough position from all of them that you can pick and choose how you're going to fight them. Besides, you can defeat Boris Ursus quickly enough. It might be a difficult battle early on, but you can just like defeat his army, that's it. Boris is done. And then you have free reign. You can take its initial province, you have a decent amount of territory to expand there. You don't really have a very strong enemy. You have a potential strong enemy in Malice Darkblade, but Malice Darkblade can also end up getting wiped out by, I know, Sigvald or Epidemius. That's been my experience, by the way, on Legendary difficulty. Playing campaigns in the area, and I've played quite a few of them. Malice Darkblade tends to do very little in his campaign, even with the campaign AI beta. So if you do have to fight him, it can be difficult, sure, but you have Epidemius between you and him. So, and Epidemius is on good relations with you. Picking a fight with Epidemius, you could probably easily defeat him, but then, of course, you might provoke Malice Darkblade. I don't think that's a wise idea. I think it's smarter to go east, or just go to Norska, really. It might actually be better to go to Norska. So, yeah, Daniel is really horrible as a Legendary Lord, but I don't really think that he's the hardest campaign of a bad Legendary Lord. I would say that prize goes to Teclis. Teclis has... I wouldn't say he has the hardest campaign in the game overall, but certainly he is the worst designed Legendary Lord in the game in a lot of ways, right? Like, he's not quite giving a run, he's not quite giving a Daniel a run for his money, but he's not necessarily that far off. Teclis has always been horrible from the very beginning of Warhammer 2. And nowadays, High Elves do desperately need a rework. But consider Teclis' situation. Whereas with Daniel, you might have a fight to Malice Darkblade. You may, and I emphasize the may aspect, have a fight with Kislev or Malachi or all that. With Teclis, you will always have a fight against Kairos, and Kairos can attack you far more easily than you can attack him. And then, to the north, you have the endgame crisis that is Warzag. Warzag, especially in the campaign AI beta, is fucking ridiculous. You have ways of controlling the situation, if you will, but it does tend to become a nightmare very, very quickly. And while you might argue that you can perfectly counter Warzag, keep in mind, he has this is one of the chief issues with Teclis. His two chief opponents that he will almost certainly have to fight one way or another are Warzag and Kairos. Do you know what both Warzag and Kairos have? A faster way of moving around the campaign area that he starts in. Back in Warhammer 2, this reminds me of how Emmeric's campaign was in Warhammer 2. Like, if this was Warhammer 2, I would agree with Emmeric's choice, but this is not Warhammer 2. In Warhammer 2, if you're playing Emeric, you had Snitch, especially on Legendary, who was in such a starting province that was an absolute nightmare to fucking navigate through. And that created a lot of issues for you as Emeric, because you could always be outmaneuvered by the guy who had more armies than you. You don't have a Skaven Legendary Lord to deal with, though you do have Skaven to deal with. You have literally no ally except maybe Tic-Tac-Toe, though he tends to get wiped out by Warzag, and Krokar, who is unreliable in quite a few ways. And even if you do defeat those enemies, congratulations, you've entered the Nehekara Thunderdome. Enjoy having to deal with Scarbrand. And the worst part about Teclis' campaign is also the climate situation does not favor you defeating Warzag and going into Nehekara. It's probably best to just create a buffer to the north between you and other factions with Volkmar if you do pull out, but yeah, just really terrible Legendary Lord difficult campaign. Annoying. Now, for an average faction, based on an average faction or an average difficulty campaign, but a fun one is Draz of Dashin. I think he's a really fun campaign. I wouldn't say it's an average difficulty campaign. It's certainly not on Legendary. On lower difficulties, maybe, but on Legendary, you are hated by almost everyone that surrounds you. Emmerich hates you, Tretch hates you, the Dwarves hate you, Grimgor hates you, and you've got a lot of territory to cover with limited armies, powerful individually, but you are surrounded. And your economy is one of the more vulnerable ones in the game because you lose a key settlement, your entire material supply chain or armament supply chain, or potentially both, if you're losing two settlements one after another, gets screwed over. Or if you lose a critical material hub and your armament production is stretched thin, your armament production goes down completely. That is the issue with Draz. It is that vulnerability, and it's not just a vulnerability early on, it's a vulnerability that persists. So I would say that I think Drazov belongs far more on Emmerich's spot, and I would actually put Emmerich in his place to certain extent, though I don't think Emmerich is as fun as some people make him out to be. From my point of view, what do I think is an average difficulty campaign that is fun? I think Forgrim. So Forgrim has Karstenik, he has Gorbad, he has Scrag potentially, he has Stretch, he has Queek. So he has a lot of different things to deal with in his campaign. It isn't the most challenging dwarf campaign, but it isn't the easiest. Grombrindle is far easier in a lot of ways. You may not have the same power potential as Malachi, but you also are not stuck in the freaking Kislev Thunderdome or the Northern Cast Waste Thunderdome. So you have a degree, and I emphasize this aspect, a degree of safety, but it is a lot of illusion as well. I also think Forgrim's campaign, whereas Forgrim is certainly a very generic legendary lord, I think he does work very well as the generic legendary lord of the dwarves. Nothing necessarily special, though, to be sure. Only Forik and Malachi have unique mechanics for dwarves, and Forik is a pretty bad campaign in a lot of ways. Then you have an average difficulty campaign, average difficulty faction to play, but one that is okay. People voted for Kemler. Of all the things that I can say about Red, I think they nailed this one. I think, if you're saying that Kemler has an average difficulty campaign, you're perfectly right. It's not the easiest campaign in the world. It's not the hardest campaign in the world. It's just kind of middle of the road. Because you have a lot of enemies, but you also have a lot of tools to deal with them, including vassalization for diplomacy. So that works pretty well. You have a decent amount of casting potential. You can get really powerful armies very quickly, but you're also dealing with a lot of shit. Wood Elves, Bretonia, Empire, you name it. Hell, Elves, Slaanesh, there's a lot of people that hate Kemler. So that is certainly something from a difficulty standpoint. As for it just kind of being a middle-of-the-road campaign in terms of good design, whether or not it's fun, I also agree with that. Kemler is one of the most easily forgotten legendary lords in the game. He's not bad, far from it. He works, he gets the job done, he's perfectly functional, the race he's part of is good. The legendary lord himself, his skill line, his faction potential, his faction effects, pretty solid. Just pretty forgettable as well as character, sadly enough. And I think that's always been the case with Kemler as a character. Though he's one of the original necromancers in the lore, or actually the original necromancer in the lore. I think he was created before Nagash. Who would I pick as opposed to Kemler? Well, I do agree firmly with Reddit on this one. As an alternative, though, I would propose Hellebron. Just as an alternative, not necessarily whereas I do disagree firmly with every choice they made on for a hard campaign, I do agree with this one. But I'm going to propose Hellebron. So, Hellebron is not a bad legendary lord, and regardless of sentiments that people express, including people like Legend of Toll, or ooh, the Dark Elves suck, they don't. They're a really strong race within the context of the Warhammer free campaigns. They have a lot of money, a lot of early game troops that work very well, good hero capacity, good availability of heroes. There's a lot of freaking things that do work for Dark Elves. But Hellebron's between Valkia, Sigvald, and Be'lakor, and also Alifanar. So that's not exactly the easiest. Anyone who tells you Malekith is a hard campaign, Hellebron's the harder campaign, and she's not exactly the hardest campaign in the world. So average difficulty, to be sure. But really, I think Hellebron wins the prize for being one of the most forgettable legendary lords in the game. Flat out. I could even argue Malice Darkblade. Of course, Malice Darkblade would be an easy but average like just forgettable campaign. Whereas I think Hellbrun is pretty strong. She's also one of the most forgettable fucking characters in the game. She doesn't look lore accurate. She doesn't feel lore accurate in any way, shape, or form in a lot of ways. Her mechanics are not bad. They get the job done, though they're annoying to deal with. So yeah, she's a frustrating, just middle of the road experience as far as campaigns go. And then an average difficulty campaign for a bad faction, it would people on Reddit voted for Wulfric. Again, another decision where I agree wholeheartedly. I think Norska is really fucking frustrating to play, but difficulty-wise, I would not say it's the hardest race to play in the game. Sure, you might have some early game issues, but between the roster, the campaign situation, all that, you can manage it, right? So average difficulty, to be sure, I agree with that. And being a bad Legendary Lord, absolutely. Wulfric is a horrible Legendary Lord that just doesn't work as he should, right? He's missing a lot of mechanics that he has in the lore. He doesn't have them in the game. In fact, what's even worse about poor Wulfric is a lot of the unique aspects about him that define him in the lore, CA took those and added them to Legendary Lords that never had them. I'm pretty sure Axial never had instant teleportation across the world in the lore. Wulfric does. He's actually one of the few characters that do. Teleportation in the Warhammer universe is actually pretty sketchy, right? It exists, but it's not so easy. Wulfric does have teleportation through the ship, through his ship figurehead. But yeah, it's just a really bad campaign. Average difficulty. Who would I put as an alternative? Again, I do agree with this decision firmly. But as an alternative, I would put Kroq-Gar. So you might say, well, you share a border with Warzag, you share a border with Kairos. Yes, but both Warzag and Kairos have other things to deal with. Even if Teclis is just, a stepping stone, or, on their path to greatness, at least he's going to slow them down a bit, right? You don't have to fight Forik. You don't even have to fight Katalida. You have those kind of choices in this campaign. So things can get pretty obnoxious, sure, with Kairos and all that. Like, I think sharing any kind of territory with a siege faction is always going to be an obnoxious campaign situation because of, settlement stealing. But at the same time, it's not the hardest campaign, far from it. Even from a Lizardman perspective, I'd say Gorok is harder because, Skulltaker to the north, Skrulk to the south, Brakarth to the west. That is a much harder campaign. But, my issue, Kroq-Gar, Lizardmen are just crap. Kroq-Gar himself is not really that he might as well not be a Legendary Lord. He's kind of like a generic Lord with a couple of extra skills here and there, but nothing exceptional. So it feels like a generic Lord that you're playing. Sure, he works in as far as Saurus Lords work, but that's about it. He doesn't necessarily feel that special. He's stronger, sure, embelled than those, but he's lacking really anything special about his character, and the race he's part of is one of the worst fucking races in the game. So, I do agree with Norska, don't get me wrong, firmly agree with Norska, but as an alternative, I would put Kroq-Gar. One could argue Mazdamundi, but I don't really think Mazdamundi's campaign is so difficult as it is completely freaking obnoxious as a campaign situation. Okay. Then we get to the easy factions. So fun, okay, and just bad easy factions. So a fun easy faction that Reddit picked is Maneater. I agree completely. I think Maneater's campaign is certainly easy. Though I don't necessarily think I think the difficulty is more what you make of it. You can have some difficult fights, or at least some fun fights here. But yeah, certainly it's more on the fun scale of it more than anything. And it can be, you're never really challenged so much in this campaign. You seek the challenge of it. It can be as hard or as easy as you want it to be. Inherently, you can make it a cakewalk of a campaign, or inherently is a cakewalk of a campaign without too much risk to it. You do have some limitations. That's one of the issues I have with Maneater, those diplomatic limitations. But yeah, great Legendary Lord, great design, unique campaign mechanics, really, really fun, that objective-based campaign. As an alternative, and I emphasize, I agree completely with the Maneater choice, but just as an alternative, I'm going to put Arbold Undefeated. I think Arbold is also a really fun freaking campaign in a very similar vein. Both of them have objective-based campaigns where they go around the world smashing people up. I actually prefer Arbol because from the perspective, he actually has a more dynamic system, whereas with Maneater, you at least need to encounter factions before you get contracts, and you might have to abandon contracts to get, new ones, all that. So that is a bit frustrating with Maneater, and the limitations on diplomacy, whereas Arbol has the same kind of dynamic campaign experience without those kind of limitations. So I think they nailed it insofar as Arbol undefeated goes. And you at least have something to risk. You can't really afford to lose a battle with Arbol. I mean, you can continue the campaign, but it's highly not recommended. Then an easy faction to play with an okay campaign, Reddit picked Tyrion. Reasonable enough choice. I mean, I do have a lot of bones to pick with the High Elves. They're not horrible race. They're just, they're just pretty broken and busted. But it's not complete misery to play them. Fair enough. Easy faction, absolutely one of the safest starting positions in the game. You can pick and choose how you're going to deal with things. You have one of the strongest legendary lords in the game. From a skill line perspective, it is ridiculous. So I can agree with that to an extent. I just think that High Elves are worse than people make it out to be. So I would probably put this as an easy but bad faction to play, as I would put every other High Elf to an extent or another, except Alefanar. What choice would I go with? I would probably go with Gelt. So Gelt's campaign is a cakewalk of a campaign. You can pick and choose how hard it's going to be, right? And certainly the initial foes you have to deal with, like, they're nothing at all. You can literally sit on your ass in the initial settlement, never conquer anything, you'll still win this campaign. Because Cafe is going to do all the work for you. So that's certainly an easy campaign. As for it being an okay campaign, but not a great one, well, I think Gelt has a lot of fun mechanics, but I think the dynamics of his campaign, if there's no risk involved, if there's a little at stake, it does lose some of its luster, and I think that's the problem with Gelt. Great campaign mechanics, can have some interesting battles, but again, you're not really risking anything, and I think having a campaign situation where the first 15 turns are really the same shit, same schlock every single time, or the first 10 or so turns of dealing with that minor Cafe faction, and it's going to take 10 turns at least, right? And you're actually incentivized to take longer, double that, triple than that, to actually gain the most amount of power in this campaign. So that is something I do not like over here with this campaign. It's too safe, too linear. So I do think Gelt has amazing faction mechanics. I just think the way his campaign plays out is not especially the best in Immortal Empires. Like, again, I love the rework, but without any kind of challenging foes to deal with and always going down that kind of linear path for at least 10 turns, it does kill replayability from a lot of perspectives. Then for an easy faction to play, but also a bad faction, people voted for Skulltaker. I both agree and disagree. So on one hand, I do agree with the sentiment that Skulltaker certainly has an easy campaign. To an extent, I don't think it's the easiest Khorne campaign. I think Arbol is potentially easier, though Arbol can also be a lot harder. And I would never judge a campaign, in 100 turns I can just conquer the entire map in a single turn. Yeah, okay, congrats on spending 100 turns to steamroll. You can do that as any legendary lord, including Daniel. That doesn't make a campaign easy. But certainly, the fact that your only real foe that you may be forced to fight, or the only foes you may be forced to fight are Albrecht, Marcus Wolfhard, Jan Bo is like a joke. I mean, Jan Bo is a powerful legendary lord, but his AI is just not great. So he's not really using that potential in that perspective. Like, let me give you a comparison. Dealing with Jan Bo as anyone is a joke. Conquering Xiao Ming is a fucking endgame nightmare. I mean, he's not the most aggressive guy, so he'll generally leave you alone, even if he hates your guts. Unless you're like Village, I suppose. But Jan Bo, he's like just really bad at decision making. Like Xiao Ming can feel like an endgame crisis, whereas Jan Bo is just a complete joke. It's the limitations of early game, limitations of climate and all that. Well, movement range, bad terrain in his initial province that really screws him over. What do I think? But with Skulltaker, yes, I can agree with that. Would I say it's a bad campaign, however? Well, I think Lustra sucks. Absolutely. So I think any campaign in Illustria inherently is going to be shit, for the most part. So I'm not disagreeing with that sentiment. Would I say Skulltaker's campaign mechanics are bad? Kind of. So I think there are a lot of nothing burgers over there, like, oh, you get more replenishment and movement range and all that if you kill enemy lords in battle. Okay. And you have teleportation to that. So just a lot of that stuff feels redundant when you're playing Khorne. Like, Arbel's mechanics are a lot freaking better. Because Arbel meshes well with the way the game is actually played, whereas Skulltaker just felt like CA adding shit to say we made a unique campaign. It is unique. It's also not that great. So I can agree with that, with those kind of sentiments. But let me be very clear on this. Whatever issues Skulltaker has, they pale in comparison to many other legendary lords, many other races, many other factions in the game. And I'm not just talking the one I would choose as an alternative. I'm literally thinking, like, here's a one alternative. Khazrak. Really crap campaign, really bad race, really bad legendary lord. All the beastmen, all the Bretonnians. Hell, you want to talk about an easy but bad campaign? Let's talk about Warriors of Chaos. You want to talk about easy? How about the auto-resolve every single turn fucking campaign where you're never at risk of losing anything? Because you might actually lose stuff as Skulltaker. It's highly unlikely, but it can happen. So I think it is a bit disingenuous to say Skulltaker is one of the worst campaigns in the game, one of the worst but easy campaigns. The one campaigns that is the worst, by far, and this is where I would say like Reddit went full on Pepega mode, by ignoring this, is the Changeling. Oh, but the Changeling is a really unique campaign. It is utter shit. Like, whereas Daniel is a really obnoxious fucking campaign with really horrible mechanics, and they didn't even put an effort to try and make unique campaign mechanics. That's why it's the worst campaign in Total War. It's not even, it's just really bad. The Changeling does have those unique mechanics, but one, they're bugged. Two, a lot of the time they do end up bugged. Two, they're nothing burger that never feel impactful, especially if you're playing on higher difficulties. You have nothing that you ever risk. Say what you will about Skulltaker. He can lose. Technically, he can lose his campaign. It's highly fucking unlikely, but he can. If you lose the Changeling, I don't know what to tell you. Like, I think a trained dog could play this campaign and not lose it on Legendary. Or I think it would be really hard to do. So, from an easy faction standpoint, yes, the Changeling is a joke. From a bad faction standpoint, those objectives are a nothing thing. They're only flash. They're a bunch of they're just emptiness. Like, basically, they look cool and look flashy, and they should be impactful, but they mean squat. Starting a civil war in the Empire means squat. Teleport the Black Pyramid of Nagash, destroy the Great Bash, and teleport Norscan legendary lords to Ulfwan or Cathay. That should feel amazing, right? All that shit, like that. I understand why people might have this perception, but I'm going to be very clear on this. You never feel, when you're playing this campaign, you never feel like the actual impact of the decisions you're making are really that great. And I think that's why I would certainly argue that Changeling is easily one of the worst campaigns in the game. It's also the easiest campaign in the game by far. There is no argument on this subject as far as I see it. From a difficulty standpoint, the Changeling wins hands down, compared even to Warriors of Chaos and Wood Elves. And yes, Khorne is easier than many other factions, but it's not as easy as the end-turn button simulator. So I can understand why some people may appreciate this campaign, but it is complete rubbish. And by the way, I just want to say this about like Reddit and the bubbles that exist on Reddit. That sentiment that I just expressed, everything I just said about the Changeling, is not just my opinion, it is the overwhelming opinion of a lot of people. Even on Reddit, there's a lot of people who hate the Changeling. Like, the fact that Skulltaker eked out to win, yeah, sure, fair enough. But even on Reddit, there's plenty of people who hate the Changeling. In every single poll that I've done on this channel with thousands and thousands of votes, far more than any subscriber base I have or anything like that, this is the campaign that has been voted down the most. So just gonna point out. That's all I had to say though. Costin signing out. Stay tuned for more.